So good day. We're learning sacred letters, Igeres HaKodesh of the Alter Rebbe, Chaf Tes, chapter 29. We'll finish it today, Mr. Shem. We're on page 300. The Alter Rebbe here began quoting Mishlei. We say it Friday nights. Eishes Chaya Lateres Baila. A woman of valor, a good woman, is the crown of her husband. We say it. We use it. Here the Alter Rebbe really takes it apart, al pi Kabbalah, al pi Chassidus, and uses a Gemora to explain to us that to receive the crown of Torah, called Kisra Shel Torah, as the Gemara says in Megillah, it requires the study of Halachas Shebet Torah, Jewish law. Now, usually, for your average Yid, Jewish law is kind of not your favorable thing because it tells you what you could and can't do. It's restrictive. And it takes, especially someone who wasn't raised that way, or was raised that way, but is not interested in that type of approach, it takes a tremendous discipline. And that's what we struggle with in different ways. Because within Halacha, there's details and details and details. Yeah, once in a while you'll find someone who's enjoys, swells up with pleasure from being meticulous in this detail and that detail. But the average person's not that way. What does the Alter Rebbe do here? He comes at it from a Kabbalistic perspective. And I would say that if you follow this Kabbalistic perspective and you understand it and relate to it, I think appreciation for halacha would be on a whole different level in a positive way. And what does he say? He says that if you want the keser of Torah, you look at halacha, you follow halacha, you learn halacha. You need to learn Gemora, Chassidus, and Chumash, and everything else. But if you want the keser of Torah, it's specifically through halacha. So right away, what the Alter Rebbe is doing, and this is, again, his genius, and why people like Rabbi Soloveitchik and others saw the Tanya as a genius, a masterpiece, like the Rambam, what the Rambam did for codifying halacha, the Alter Rebbe did for Kabbalah. What the Alter Rebbe is doing is he's coming at it from a whole different paradigm. He's changing our paradigm, how to look at it halacha. That's the underlying message, the way I see it, of this chapter. And when you understand that halacha is associated with the Ratzon Hashem, specifically the keser of the Torah, your appreciation for it is not, I have to do this. Rather, what an opportunity to connect. I can get the crown. Not only the seichel, but the crown. And this is the theme of this chapter. So I didn't say this till today, which is, we're going to finish the chapter, because every time you learn it, you think about it, new ideas formulate. And this came to me. So I felt that this is a good monologue for us to begin. Let's turn to page 300. 3 lines from the bottom. What the Alter Rebbe says here, Isser, that it's Torah Shebal Peh specifically that opens up Torah Shebeksav. And he gives the mashal, Ukshartam liosa yodecha v'hayu l'toitafos beinanecha, mazeh. Eifo zeh beinanecha. Maybe it's on the metzach. Maybe it's on the forehead. No. Avram, Yodecha. Where? How do we know specifically where to put on tefillin? The answer is only through Chazal in the Gemora. So the oral Torah, the Torah Shebal Peh, is the area that identifies and clarifies and elaborates on Torah Shebeksav. So Torah Shebeksav is the Ish, and Torah Shebal Peh is the Isha. I don't care what type of man and masculine you are, you ain't having a baby. It hasn't happened yet. You need an Isha. And you need an Isha to take 9 months, 7 to 9 months, whatever. And only then can there come out a baby, a child, an offspring, a result. You could be the biggest macho man, the biggest genius, the biggest Talmud Chacham. As we say in good old Yiddish, it gur nicht helfen. It ain't gonna help you an iota. You need a woman to have a child. All these philosophies and ideologies, it's nada sheba nada in Hebrew, efes sheba efes. So the Alter Rebbe says that without Torah Shebal Peh, Torah Shebiksav is closed. We don't know. Imagine if we wouldn't have Hillel, the Gemora. We wouldn't know where to put on tefillin. We wouldn't know what Totafis means. We wouldn't know that there's in the Shel Yad one parsha, and in the Shel Rosh on one ksav, on one klaf, and in the Shel Rosh there's 4 different pieces of parchment. I mean, we wouldn't know any of this. And this is the Ratzon Hashem. This is the Ratzon Hashem. Some will say, well, what's the difference between writing it on one parsha, on one piece of parchment, or 4 separate ones? Well, if you learn the Gemara, you learn the Mefarshim, and you take it apart, you'll see that that's not the way it should be done. So all of this points to that Halacha, which is the implementation of the Gemara, secures and clarifies what God wants. And without it, it's what I want. And that's the basic idea. I want and decide to serve God in a certain way. Thank you very much. Who are you? You're a human being, frail. You're a human being that's a flesh and blood. Big deal. But this is the Ratzon Hashem. How do I know? Because the Gemara explains it. Who's the Gemara? The Tanoim, the Amoraim. Now, of course, if someone doesn't believe in all that, then we have to go back to basics. Belief in God and the belief in Torah, but that's a different discussion. This discussion we're having here in this Pedic is based on the fact that you do believe there is a God, and you do believe Hashem has a Torah Shebiksav and a Torah Shebal Peh. So let's continue now. Page 300 at bottom. Last 3 lines. V'chein kol mitzvah shebetayra. So too we find this with all other mitzvahs. Bei mitzvah say mitzvahs leisa say ein gluyas v'yaduas are not revealed and known umforoshes and explicit ela yedei Torah Shebal Peh unless it's interpreted and it's elaborated and explained in the oral Torah. Ke mitzvahs lo sesa shenemar. Let's take for example the negative commandment. B'Shabbos, it says, Lo tase melacha, don't do any work. Next page, Kufnov Aleph. V'lo pirish, mahu melacha, don't do any work. What type of work? It doesn't say in the Torah what type of work. Uv Torah Shebal Peh comes along the oral Torah. Nisparish, it's explained, Sheilama tes melachas refers to the 39 acts of work. Hayaduas, that is known. V'loi tiltul avonim v'koides kvedes ukiyoytze behein. And not, the movement of stones and heavy beams and similar. Hen kol mitzvahs bei mitzvahs, and the same is true with all other mitzvahs, positive and negative. Hen stumos, they are concealed, they're closed, they're secret. The lei mufuroshes, the gluyas are not explicit and revealed. The yaduas are known. El al yedei, he makes the same point, al yedei Torah Shebal Peh through the oral Torah. Umshum hoch iksiv al Torah Shebal Peh. And this is why, regarding the oral tradition, it is written, al titaish Toras imecha. Don't throw away, don't shove away the Torah of your mother. As the Zohar explains it, mishum shal derech mosel kamoi seichel evrei havlad, kamoi shekol evrei havlad, Just as the Zohar says, all limbs of a fetus, of a child, Klulim betipas ha'av, are incorporated in the drop of semen of the father. Behelim, it's concealed, godlu, in a great concealment. V'ho'eim, it's what I said earlier. And the mother, moitziosoi, it takes out that, from that drop of semen, the details, lidei to revelation, b'leidosoi, by giving birth. Vlad of a child, Shalom, that's complete, but Amache, Varam, 248 limbs, Vishlagidin, 365 sinews, etc. So Kochamam is so too in the analogy, in the moral, I'm sorry, Kora, Machmitzah, also 248 and 365, Boyim, Me'ahelem Elagili, they come from the concealment to reveal the Torah Shabbat, specifically in the oral tradition. V'reisha the Kro, and the beginning of this verse says, Shma b'ni, listen my child, Musar avicha, to the scolding of your father. That refers to Koi Atayra Shabiksav. That's a reference to the written Torah. Because the Nafkim Chochmi law, the written Torah comes from what we call supernal wisdom. But when it says, Val Titosh Torah Simecha, right? This is the verse. Shma b'ni Musar avicha val titosh Torah simecha. Shma b'ni Musar avicha is a reference to Torah Shabbat. Val titosh Torah simecha, don't shove aside, push aside the Torah of your mother. It's a reference to Torah Shabbat Peh. And Hanikra b'sheimav, a father, right, gives the drop of semen, which has everything in it, but it's concealed. Hence, the father symbol in this analogy of the Zohar HaKodesh refers to what? Refers to Torah Shabiksav, which is concealed. Al Titosh Torah Simecha, calling the Torah of your mother, refers to Torah Shabbat Peh, because she developed, just as she develops the drop of semen, then the child is born from it, etc. So too, the Torah Shabbat Peh reveals what's in the Torah Shabiksav. Now the Alter Rebbe goes back to the opening pasuk that he used in this chapter. A woman of valor, Ateres Baila, is the crown of her husband. Why? Ki Ateres Shabbat Peh Hanikra Isha. Ateres Shabbat Peh, which is called Isha, Chayil, which is called, Hanikra Eishes Chayil, the oral Torah, which is called a woman of valor, Hamelido Mamedes Chayolis Harbe, which sets up and establishes many kind of armies, many solid situations, because of Alomos a Mispar, Adam Fanitim, amount of worlds. Al Tikri Alomos, Elo Oilamos, the creation of many worlds, Elu, halachas. This is a reference to all the laws, to halacha. They last long chushbana. We don't have an account. How many halachas are there? It's brought this from the Zohar, I believe. Last long chushbana. There's no finite amount of halacha, because if you learn more and more and more, you dig more and more, you come to more halachas. As it says in the section of Zohar called Tikkunim. And all of these halachas, they are the revelation of God's will, which is normally concealed in the Torah Shabbat, in the written Torah. And the will of God, right? The Ratzon of Hashem, it transcends, it's above. The crown Hillel is above the head. Chochmah, even Chochmah of Hashem, is, which we call Chochmi law, supernal Chochmah, supernal wisdom, is limited to Chochmah. It's already an attribute. It's already a certain, you like to use the word, a fascination, a description, a definition. Ratzon is above that. What do you mean above that? The Ratzon is not limited and measured by a specific area. You can, one second, you can have Ratzin in Chochmah, Ratzin in Maisa, Ratzin in Dibur. In other words, willpower is bereft of a domain. It's equal throughout. Yes, Hillel.
Yes, so implicit in that is that the idea of Ratzon is pre-symptom, pre-stalshalus of any kind.
Yes, but as you learn Chassidus, you see that there's levels of Ratzon after Stalshalus too. But that's already what we call in Chassidus. There's a term, is Ratzon v'is Ratzon. There is Ratzon and there is Ratzon, meaning there's a Ratzon l'mayla mishtalshalus, which we're talking about here, and there's a Ratzon l'mata mishtalshalus. But the concept of Ratzon, even, I'll say this way, it's a good point you're making, I'm glad you brought it up. The concept of Ratzon, even l'mata mishtalshalus, if you compare it to the spheres miyuchodesh for the particular emanations, it's more pure. But being that it's already after Ishtalshalus, it's governed by Ishtalshalus. So in other words, Ratzon is a mindset, the willpower, but there is the willpower, the way willpower transcends everything, and there's the willpower that's already in a domain which is non-transcendent, i.e. Ishtalshalus, but within that framework, there's still a difference between Ratzon and Chochmah. Okay? We'd have to think of a good mashal for this point. Let me think about it. How to explain it? Not right now. Okay. So he says, U'kemoi keser. The Alter Rebbe says, and this is analogous to a crown, v'atorah, crown, yeah, shalamoichin, that's on the head, sheberoish, right? It's on the head. V'lochein nikru halacha is b'shem taga. You see, in the beginning, he brought the concept, the words taga chalaf. Someone who uses halacha for their own benefit, in their own selfish benefit, will cease to be, will die. So the question was, why the word taga? Not the word, why the concept? Taga means a crown. So the Rebbe says, nikru halacha b'shem taga, because we're specifically referring to halacha, the kisr shel Torah. So if you abuse it, the punishment is heavy. And if you use it in the proper way, the reward is whoever studies halachas is promised the world to come. Because a person's soul, spirit soul, the person's neshama, is then invested in the Ratzon Elyon Baruch Hu canal. So what we walk away with is that our nefesh, our neshama, our nefesh, our soul is, when we learn Gemora, because Gemora is a plateau and a domain which is open for argumentation and all of that. So though it's Torah Shebal Peh, see, we have two things going on here in this chapter. There is Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebiksav, oral Torah versus written Torah. So if you make that the scenario, oral Torah opens up Torah Shebiksav, so oral Torah is the Isha, and Torah Shebiksav and written Torah is the Ish. But within oral Torah itself, the Alter Rebbe quotes the Gemaras and the Zohar, there is the Kisra Shel Torah. Avram, the crown within the oral tradition. So there you make the comparison between Gemara, Talmud, and Halacha, which, by the way, Halacha is often referred to as Mishnah, because Mishnah is brief. Right? At the night of the 14th, you check for chametz. How do we check? What do we use? Right? But it says there, that's the instruction. So when you relate to the Ratzon Hashem, when you relate to the halacha, do this and don't do that, and you don't necessarily, and you have the Gemora to explain what the this and the that is, but the bottom line is the commitment to the will of God, to the Ratzon. So in other words, the Ratzon is transcendent. It's outside of a situation where you can argue with the Ratzon. You can't argue with the Ratzon. I mean, you either believe the Ratzon or you don't believe the Ratzon. But the willpower, what's willpower? Willpower is strength, right? Willpower. When you talk about seichel, the mind, it lends itself, it was created by Hashem in such a way and in such a domain and plateau that it wants argumentation. It thrives on argumentation. So automatically, it's not unadulterated. It's not pure. There's more of the I in intellect than there is in Ratzon. You'll say, you might be asking yourself, willpower comes from me. Yeah. So that would be Hillel, would be similar to what I said earlier, the willpower that's below Hishtalshalus or the willpower that's above Hishtalshalus. The willpower that's below Hishtalshalus already is the I is mixed in. But nevertheless, right, we say, Batel ritzoincha liritzoinoi, Pirkei Avos. No, obliterate, get rid of your will for God's will. That's a lower level. In other words, that's accepting there is God's will and there's my will. And what are we told? Put yourself aside. The higher level of willpower is there's no I will. There's only God's will. And I've obliterated and gotten rid of any trace of yeshus, of gaiva, of ego, to the point where my will is God's will. That's already a higher sense of Ratzon that transcends the progression, the Ishtalshalus. And the Alter Rebbe says that Halacha is demonstrative of this idea. Because in Halacha, as much as I understand and as much as I disagree, I follow Halacha. That is the beauty and the impact of Halacha is. In other words, if you're able to put aside the way you understand something, and which is contrary to the way Halacha says it should be, you're a great man. Because the average person doesn't want to do that. In other words, God gave me a cup. God gave me brains. God tells me to study and to learn, and I come to another conclusion using my head, my brains, and how am I supposed to do it? Contrary to myself. Right? It doesn't make sense. And the answer is, you're right, it doesn't make sense. Because Ratzon is greater than sense. So, doing the Ratzon Hashem through the Halacha specifically is the test. It's the litmus test to see whether is this my agenda on some level or is it God's agenda? And this is what we struggle with, meaning this is Avodas Hashem. This is daily Avodas Hashem. There's not even a question. From the most, minute issues to the greatest issues. It's not just about whether I should eat the pork sandwich or the ham sandwich, chas v'sholem, or not. That's okay, fine. It's whether, I should control my midas and say something nasty, or someone who, on Purim, you go to someone who Baruch Hashem, and he gives you $1. You feel like taking $1 and shoving it into his face. Like, come on. What are you embarrassing? No. It's Purim. It's a higher energy. There's a higher energy. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass others. Just let it go. And so in so many different ways, the Ratzon Hashem, what it says is Shulchan Aruch. That's the hardest thing. I want to conclude that Rebbe is someone who lives in my block. Actually, He's a Boston. Well, he's not so much a Bostoner Chassid, but he comes from the Bostoner Rebbe's family, Horowitz. He's a big Talmud Chacham. So he learned in Brisk in the 1974-75. His Zayda, his grandfather lived in Crown Heights. His name was Rabbi Krieger. And he was a big Rav, a Paisik, and he wrote Gittin. He was known. And he was himself, came from Belz or Galicia, he was a Belz Chassid. So his grandson, was, he was aligned with the Bostoner family, but he wasn't really, and he went to Brisk. So, he wasn't so Hasidish, God had a whole beard and lange rekel, but so his Zayda, who was close to the Rebbe, suggested to him he go in for his wedding to the Rebbe for a bracha. The Rebbe, people used to go in with their chassan and kala before. So I don't know if he went with the kala, he went himself, but he told me that the Rebbe asked him, where did you learn? So he said in Brisk, I think Lakewood and then Brisk. And then the Rebbe said, and Halacha, Matia, in Brisk, it's all about the analysis of a Rambam. You know what I'm saying? And the Rebbe said, Halacha Matia, what's going to be with Halacha? And the Rebbe explained to him the concept of Torah Lishma, which only years later he said because the Rebbe spoke about this later in Fabrengens and wrote about it. His understanding of Torah Lishma versus Rabbi Chaim Dalfin, it's a whole thing. And he didn't realize the Rebbe spoke to him when he was a chassan in 1975, and kind of saying, hey guy, you're a Talmud Chacham, you learned in Brisk, you're going to Koilel, what's going to be with Halacha? When we learn this chapter, we understand better that attitude. And you should know, the Rebbe, when Rebbe Chaim Mushka passed away in 1988, he asked Rabbi Groner to bring him a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Not a Rav Shulchan Aruch, not a Mishnah Berurah, not a Kaf HaChaim, not a Aruch HaShulchan, not the big Shulchan Aruch, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. That's why I was learning with you Chevra, those in the beginning when we started the Koilel, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, I think Yoni was there. Kitzer, we make light of Kitzer. If it's good enough with Lubavitch Rebbe, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, and I know that my father-in-law, was a Russian chassid. He knew Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Everything's a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. You have to then open it up. So anyway, this is the chapter. Chavra, we're going to continue tomorrow, Shem, learning chapter 30. We'll finish it because it's a very short chapter. Have a great day, everyone. Sei gesund. Bye-bye.
Sei gesund. Take care.